The wealthy businessman had everything money could buy, but he was drowning in plain sight until a humble waitress saw what no one else could, a man breaking apart behind his perfect facade. What started as simple kindness over untouched meals would spiral into a love story that threatened to destroy the carefully constructed walls of high society. But when his glamorous ex-fiancée discovered their secret connection, she unleashed a calculated attack designed to remind them both exactly where they belonged. The waitress thought she knew heartbreak until she learned the difference between being left and being systematically destroyed. Little did the ex-fiancé know, some bonds forged in genuine recognition can't be broken by money, manipulation, or cruel words whispered in dimly lit restaurants. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to disappear. If you're watching this story unfold, hit subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The dinner rush at Marcel's was just beginning when Alicia Moore tied her apron strings and checked her reflection in the small mirror by the kitchen door. 27 years old and still surprised sometimes by how much she looked like her mother. Same warm brown eyes, same careful smile that revealed just enough to be friendly, but not too much to get hurt. "Table 6 is asking for you specifically," Marcus called from behind the bar, his voice carrying that easy confidence that made him such a good manager. High Roller just walked in with his business friends. Alicia smoothed down her black uniform and grabbed her order pad. Marcel's wasn't the fanciest restaurant in the city, but it drew a certain crowd, people with money who wanted good food without the pretense of the truly expensive places. She'd been working here for 3 years, long enough to read her customers before they even looked at the menu. The man at table 6 was different, though. He sat with perfect posture, expensive suit tailored to fit exactly right, watch that probably cost more than Alicia made in 6 months. But his eyes were somewhere else entirely. While his companions talked loudly about quarterly reports and market projections, he stared at nothing in particular, his fork moving food around his plate without actually eating. "Good evening, gentlemen," Alicia said, approaching with water glasses. "Can I get you anything else to drink?" The others barely looked up, too caught up in their conversation about interest rates and investment strategies. But the quiet one, Daniel, she heard them call him, glanced up with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine with water, thank you," he said. His voice was soft, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. Alicia nodded and moved to refill the glasses, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the way his shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight, or how he kept touching his phone like he was expecting a call that would never come. She'd seen that look before, in her own mirror, actually, about 2 years ago when the world felt like it was ending. "The salmon is really good tonight," she offered quietly, just to him. "Fresh from the market this morning." Daniel looked up again, and for just a moment, his careful mask slipped. "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She walked away, feeling unsettled, like she'd recognized something she couldn't name. The evening wore on with its usual rhythm. Orders taken, plates delivered, small talk exchanged with regulars who knew her by name. But Alicia found herself glancing toward table 6 more often than usual. Daniel's friends were getting louder with each round of drinks, their laughter sharp and too bright under the restaurant's warm lighting. Daniel himself had barely touched his food, just sat there nodding at appropriate moments while his mind wandered somewhere else entirely. When she returned to clear their appetizer plates, one of the men was telling a story about a weekend in the Hamptons. "You should have been there, right?" he said, slapping Daniel on the shoulder. "Would have done you some good to get out of the city for a while." "Maybe next time," Daniel replied, but Alicia could hear the politeness covering something deeper. Pain, maybe. The kind that made everything else feel like noise. She'd felt that way herself once, after Jeremy had left, not just left, but disappeared with no explanation, no closure. Nothing but empty drawers and a note that said he needed space to figure himself out. For months afterward, every conversation had felt like she was listening from underwater, everyone's words distant and meaningless, while grief sat heavy in her chest. "Excuse me," Daniel said as she reached for his untouched salad. Could I get the salmon you mentioned earlier?" "Of course." Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten with recognition. It really is good tonight. He almost smiled then. Almost. I trust you. 2 words that shouldn't have meant much from a stranger, but somehow did. When Alicia brought his dinner 20 minutes later, Daniel's friends were deep in discussion about some merger, their voices animated with the kind of passion that came from chasing numbers. Daniel had excused himself from the conversation entirely, sitting quietly with his hands folded, watching the other diners with something that looked like longing. "Here you go," she said, setting down the salmon with its delicate herb crust and bright vegetables. "Extra lemon on the side, just in case." "Thank you." He picked up his fork with what seemed like genuine intention to eat this time. "This place, it feels different from most restaurants downtown. More human?" Alicia suggested when he struggled for the word. "Exactly." This time his smile was real. Brief, but real. "People actually talk to each other here. They look at each other." "It's one of the reasons I like working here," she admitted, then caught herself being more personal than she usually was with customers. "I mean, it's a good environment." "You've been here long?" 3 years. She should have moved on to check other tables, but something kept her there. "It's honest work with honest people." Daniel nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. Like maybe he spent most of his time in places that weren't honest, with people who weren't either. "That sounds peaceful," he said. "It can be." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the noise of his friend's conversation fading into background. Alicia felt that strange recognition again, stronger now. This man with his expensive clothes and quiet sadness, he reminded her of herself right after Jeremy left. Rich or poor didn't matter when you were drowning. "I should let you eat," she said finally. "Of course. Thank you for the recommendation, and for—" He paused, looking for words again. "For being kind." Alicia walked away, wondering what had happened to make a man with everything sound so grateful for simple human kindness. The rest of the evening passed quickly, but she found herself thinking about Daniel Wright. She'd caught his last name from his friend's conversation. When it came time to bring the check, his companions were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to pay. Daniel simply handed Alicia his credit card without looking at the total. "Thank you," he said as she processed the payment. "The salmon was perfect. I'm glad you enjoyed it." He left a 20% tip, respectable but not showy, and stood to leave with his friends. But at the last moment, he turned back. "Will you be working tomorrow night?" he asked quietly. "I work most nights," Alicia replied, not sure why her heart was beating a little faster. "Good. I mean," he looked embarrassed. "This was a nice meal, a peaceful evening. I'm glad." And then he was gone, following his friends out into the city night, leaving Alicia with the strangest feeling that something important had just happened, though she couldn't say what. She was wiping down the table when Marcus appeared beside her, drying a glass with his usual methodical care. "Everything okay over here?" he asked. "You seemed a little distracted tonight." "Just tired, I guess." Alicia folded the tip money into her apron pocket. "Long day." Marcus studied her with the kind of attention that came from managing a restaurant and people for 15 years. He was good at reading the signs when someone was carrying more than they could handle. "That guy seemed nice enough," he offered casually. "Quieter than his friends." "Yeah, he was polite." "Polite is good. Polite pays the bills and doesn't cause trouble." Marcus paused in his glass drying. "Sometimes polite is hiding something, though. You know? That, right?" Alicia looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific. Just, I've been in this business a long time. People come here for different reasons. Some want to be seen, some want good food, and some," he shrugged, "some are looking for something else entirely." "Like what?" "Like feeling normal again." Marcus's words stayed with Alicia as she finished her closing duties and caught the bus home to her small apartment across town. Feeling normal again. That phrase settled in her chest like recognition, because hadn't that been exactly what she'd wanted after Jeremy left? Not happiness, not even peace, just the simple ability to feel normal in her own skin again. She thought about Daniel's tired smile, the way he'd barely touched his food until she'd suggested the salmon, the gratitude in his voice when she'd shown him basic kindness. The careful way he'd asked if she'd be working tomorrow night, like he was afraid to want something but couldn't help himself. Her apartment was dark and quiet when she got home, but instead of the loneliness she sometimes felt in the evening, tonight the silence felt thoughtful. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the street, watching late-night traffic and thinking. 2 years ago, when Jeremy had left without explanation or goodbye, she'd thought the pain would never end. Her mother had driven up from Baltimore to sit with her for a week, not saying much, just being present while Alicia cried and raged and, finally, slowly, began to heal. The hardest part hadn't been missing him. It had been learning to trust her own judgment again, learning to believe that she was worthy of honesty and care. She'd built a good life since then, simple but solid. Work she enjoyed, friends she could count on, peace with herself that felt real and earned. She wasn't looking for anything more complicated than that. But sitting there with her tea, watching the city lights, Alicia found herself wondering about Daniel Wright. What had put that particular sadness in his eyes? What made a wealthy man sit in a restaurant full of people and still look utterly alone? And why did some part of her, the part that had learned to recognize pain because she'd carried it herself, want to understand? The next afternoon, Alicia found herself arriving at work earlier than usual. She told herself it was because she wanted to help with the prep work, but the truth was more complicated. All day she'd been thinking about quiet voices and tired smiles, about the way Daniel had said, "I trust you," like those words meant more than they should. "You're early," Marcus observed as she tied her apron. "Everything okay at home?" "Everything's fine. Just wanted to get a head start on things." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. He had a talent for knowing when to ask questions and when to let people work through things on their own. The dinner crowd was lighter than usual for a Thursday, which gave Alicia time to really focus on her customers. She found herself looking toward the entrance more often than necessary, though she couldn't say exactly what she was expecting. It was almost 8:30 when Daniel walked in. Alone this time, dressed in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that made him look younger somehow, less like a businessman and more like a person. He paused in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. "Good evening," the hostess said. "Table for one?" "If possible, could I sit in Alicia's section?" he asked, his voice carrying just far enough for her to hear. Alicia felt her cheeks warm as the hostess glanced her way with raised eyebrows. She nodded, and a moment later, Daniel was being seated at a small table by the window, the one that usually stayed empty on weeknight evenings. She gave him a few minutes to settle in before approaching with water and a menu. "Good evening," she said, proud that her voice sounded normal. "Nice to see you again." "Hi." He looked almost nervous, like he wasn't sure if coming back had been the right choice. "I hope you don't mind. I asked specifically for your section." "I don't mind at all. Did you enjoy the salmon last night?" "Very much. Actually, it was the best meal I'd had in—" He paused, considering. "In a long time." There was something in the way he said it that made Alicia think he wasn't just talking about the food. "Well, the chef will be happy to hear that," she said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Just water's fine. And maybe, do you have a minute to tell me what else you'd recommend?" It wasn't an unusual request from a customer, but something in his tone suggested he was asking for more than menu advice. Alicia glanced around the restaurant. It was quiet enough that she could spare a moment. "The chicken marsala is really good," she said, "and the pasta special tonight is homemade ravioli with butternut squash. Comfort food, but elevated." "Comfort food," Daniel repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds perfect." She wrote down his order, but instead of walking away immediately, she found herself lingering. "Are you from the city?" she asked, then felt foolish for the personal question. "Born and raised, Upper East Side." He said it without pride, just fact. "You?" "Baltimore, originally. Been here about 5 years now." "What brought you to New York?" Alicia hesitated. The real answer was Jeremy. She'd moved here for him, for the life they were supposed to build together. But that felt like too much truth to share with a customer, even one who asked like he genuinely wanted to know. "Change of scenery," she said finally. "Sometimes you need to start fresh somewhere new." Daniel nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. "Sometimes the place you're from stops feeling like home." "Yes." The word came out more emphatically than she'd intended. Exactly that. They looked at each other for a moment, and Alicia felt that same recognition from the night before, the sense that this person understood something important about loss and starting over. "I should put your order in," she said finally. "Of course. Thank you." As she walked toward the kitchen, Alicia caught Marcus watching her with curiosity. She gave him a quick smile and focused on her work, but part of her mind stayed with the man at table 12, wondering what had made his birthplace stop feeling like home. Daniel's ravioli arrived 20 minutes later, and when Alicia set it down, he looked up with genuine appreciation. "This looks amazing," he said. "Thank you for the recommendation." "You're welcome. Is there anything else I can get you?" He hesitated, fork halfway to his mouth. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you always seem so calm? Even in the middle of a busy dinner rush, you have this presence, like nothing can shake you." The question caught Alicia off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it suggested he'd been watching her carefully enough to notice something that personal. "I don't know if I'm actually calm," she said honestly. "I think I just learned that staying steady gets you through things better than falling apart." Learned from what? Another pause, another moment where she could give a polite surface answer or risk something deeper. "Life," she said. "Hard things that teach you what matters and what doesn't." Daniel set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I'm sorry. That was too personal a question." "It's okay. I try not to talk too much about the hard things. They're in the past for a reason." "Of course. I understand." But the way he said it, with such quick comprehension, made Alicia think he might understand better than most people, that maybe he had his own hard things he'd learned to carry quietly. The rest of his meal passed with comfortable small talk, the weather, the restaurant's history, safe topics that let them both relax. When it came time for the check, Daniel left another generous but not excessive tip and stood to go. "Thank you again," he said, "for everything. Just doing my job." "No," he said quietly. "You're doing much more than that." He left before she could ask what he meant, but his words stayed with her through the rest of her shift and the bus ride home. "You're doing much more than that." What did he see that she wasn't aware of giving? That night, as she got ready for bed, Alicia found herself thinking about recognition again. How sometimes you could look at a stranger and see yourself reflected back, not in their appearance or circumstances, but in something deeper. Some shared understanding of what it meant to rebuild yourself piece by piece after the world had fallen apart. She didn't know Daniel Wright's story, but she was beginning to recognize the shape of it, and despite every instinct that told her to keep her distance, to protect the peace she'd worked so hard to find, some part of her wanted to know more. Some part of her was already starting to care. The third night Daniel came in, Alicia was ready for him. Not in any dramatic way. She hadn't changed her routine or spent extra time on her appearance. But she'd accepted that something was happening here, something that went beyond the usual customer-server relationship, and she found herself looking forward to seeing him in a way that both excited and worried her. He arrived at 7:15, alone again, and asked for the same table by the window. This time, when he smiled at her, it reached his eyes for just a moment. "Becoming a regular, I see," Alicia said as she brought his water. "Is that okay? I know some servers prefer variety in their customers." "Regulars are good. They tip consistently and you know what to expect from them." She paused, then added more softly, "Besides, I like seeing familiar faces." "Even my face?" There was something almost vulnerable in the way he asked it, like he genuinely wasn't sure if his presence was welcome. It reminded Alicia of herself in those first months after Jeremy left, when she'd been so uncertain about her worth that she'd questioned every kindness. "Especially your face," she said, then felt her cheeks warm at how that sounded. "I mean, you're easy to serve. Polite. You actually eat the food." Daniel laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. "Setting the bar pretty low there. You'd be surprised how many people fail that test." This time, when she took his order, the chicken marsala, which she'd recommended, their conversation flowed more easily. He asked about her favorite items on the menu, and she found herself telling him about the chef's secret ingredient in the bread pudding and why the Tuesday fish special was always the best deal. You really care about this place, he observed. I care about doing good work. And I like the people here. Marcus, he's the manager. He's fair. The kitchen staff treats everyone with respect. It makes a difference. It does. Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. I spend a lot of time in places where people don't treat each other well. It's refreshing to be somewhere genuine. What kind of work do you do? Alicia asked, then immediately felt like she'd crossed a line. Sorry, that's none of my business. No, it's fine. I'm in investment banking, corporate finance mostly. He said it matter-of-factly, without the pride or self-importance she might have expected. It pays well, but it's not particularly meaningful work. Alicia nodded, thinking about how different their worlds were. She made enough to cover rent and groceries with a little left over for savings, while he probably made in a month what she made in a year. But sitting here talking to him, that difference felt less important than the fact that they could talk at all. Meaningful work is rare, she said. Most of us just try to find meaning in how we do the work we have. That's a wise way to look at it. Daniel picked up his water glass, then set it down without drinking. Can I ask you something else? Sure. Do you ever feel invisible? Like you could be standing right in front of someone and they still wouldn't really see you? The question was so unexpected, so precisely aimed at something Alicia understood completely that she had to take a breath before answering. Yes, she said quietly. I know exactly what you mean. How do you deal with it? I try to remember that being seen isn't the same as being known, and being known matters more than being noticed. Daniel stared at her like she'd said something profound, when to Alicia it just felt like common sense born from hard experience. Who knows you? He asked. My mother, Marcus in his way, a few close friends. She paused. That's enough. It sounds like enough. It sounds... He struggled for words again. It sounds peaceful. It is now. It wasn't always. Something in her tone must have warned him not to push further, because he nodded and changed the subject to safer ground. But the conversation had shifted something between them. They'd moved past polite stranger territory into something more honest. When Daniel left that night, he lingered by the table for just a moment. Would it be inappropriate if I asked when you get off work? He said. Alicia's heart jumped. I close tonight. Won't be done until almost 11. That's late. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime when you're not working? She looked at him. Really looked. He was nervous, she realized. This wealthy, polished man was nervous about asking her for coffee. It made him seem younger somehow, more human. There's a diner a few blocks from here, she said slowly. Harper's. They're open late and they make decent coffee. Tomorrow night, after your shift? Okay. The word came out before she could second-guess herself. I'll meet you there around 11:30. Daniel's smile transformed his entire face. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. After he left, Marcus appeared at her elbow with a knowing look. Coffee date? It's just coffee, Alicia protested, but she couldn't keep the smile out of her voice. Famous last words, Marcus said, but he was grinning. Just be careful, okay? Rich guys and working girls, it's complicated. I know what I'm doing. Do you? The question followed Alicia home that night and kept her awake longer than usual. Did she know what she was doing? Daniel seemed kind, genuine in a way that felt real. But Marcus was right. Their worlds were incredibly different. What did a man who probably owned more than she'd ever have want with someone like her? Then again, what did she want with him? The next evening dragged by with unusual slowness. Alicia found herself checking the clock more often than necessary and making small mistakes, forgetting to refill water glasses, mixing up orders. Marcus noticed, of course. You're distracted tonight, he observed during a quiet moment. Second thoughts about coffee? No, maybe, I don't know. Alicia tied her apron strings more tightly, like that might help her focus. It's been a long time since I've, put myself out there. Since Jeremy? She nodded. Marcus had worked here when Jeremy used to pick her up after shifts, had seen the aftermath when those pickups stopped happening. This Daniel guy seems different, Marcus said carefully. Quieter, more respectful. Yeah, he does seem different. But I liked Jeremy too in the beginning. I thought I knew him. Alicia straightened the silverware on a nearby table, needing something to do with her hands. I'm not sure I trust my judgment anymore. Your judgment is fine. It's your heart that got you in trouble before. What's the difference? Marcus considered this seriously, the way he considered everything. Judgment is about what someone shows you. Heart is about what you hope they might be. The trick is learning to see the difference. It was good advice, Alicia thought as she finished her shift. The trick was learning to see the difference. So what was Daniel showing her really? Politeness, certainly. Loneliness, maybe. Some kind of pain he carried carefully, the way she'd learned to carry her own. But what did she hope he might be? That was a more dangerous question. Harper's Diner was exactly the kind of place it sounded like. Vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, coffee that was strong, if not sophisticated. Alicia arrived first and chose a booth in the back, somewhere they could talk without being overheard. She was halfway through her first cup of coffee when Daniel appeared in the doorway, looking around uncertainly. He'd changed from his work clothes into jeans and a sweater, which made him look less intimidating but somehow more handsome. When he spotted her, his face lit up with relief. "Hi," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking." They ordered coffee and sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both seeming to realize that this was different from their conversations at the restaurant. More intentional, more personal. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said finally. "Of course. I was nervous about tonight. Really nervous. I kept thinking you might change your mind, or I'd say something wrong, or..." He shook his head. "It's been a long time since I've done this." "Done what?" "Talked to someone I actually wanted to know better." The honesty in his voice made Alicia's chest tighten. "It's been a long time for me too." "Bad breakup?" "Something like that. You?" Daniel was quiet for so long that Alicia thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was testing the words. "My younger brother died 6 months ago. Car accident. Since then, I've felt like I'm living, underwater. Everything feels distant and muffled, and I can't quite reach the surface." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Alicia felt her heart crack a little for this man who carried such enormous grief while trying to function in a world that probably expected him to be fine. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "How old was he?" 28. 2 years younger than me. He was..." Daniel's voice caught. "He was the good one. The one who chose social work over finance, who spent his weekends volunteering at shelters. He made the world better just by being in it. And now you feel like you should have been the one." Daniel looked up sharply. "How did you know that?" "Because I know guilt. It's different from grief, but they live in the same neighborhood." They sat quietly while the diner hummed around them, other conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine, the distant sound of traffic. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "What's your guilt about?" Alicia wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, using the warmth to steady herself. "I was with someone for 3 years, Jeremy. I thought we were building a life together, but it turned out I was the only one building. He was just visiting. He left. He disappeared. No fight, no explanation. Just gone one day with a note saying he needed to figure himself out." She took a shaky breath. "The guilt isn't about missing him. It's about not seeing the signs, about being so stupid that I thought someone loved me when they were just passing through." "That's not stupid," Daniel said fiercely. "That's trusting. That's believing the best in someone." "Same result, though." "No, it's not. Trusting the wrong person doesn't make you wrong. It makes them wrong." Alicia looked at him across the table, this man with his own enormous pain who was somehow worried about hers, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been locked tight for 2 years began to loosen just slightly. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Keep going to work, keeping up with friends, acting normal when everything feels broken." "I don't know if I am doing it. Most days I feel like I'm just going through the motions." Daniel stirred sugar into his coffee absently. "Until I came to your restaurant. Those nights are the first time in months I've felt present. Like I'm actually here instead of just existing." "What's different about those nights?" "You see me. Not my job or my money or what I'm supposed to be. You see me." He paused. "It's been so long since someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a function." Alicia understood completely. In the months after Jeremy left, she'd felt invisible even when people were looking right at her, like her grief had made her transparent, something people looked through rather than at. "I see you because I recognize you," she said softly. "You look the way I felt for a long time, like you're drowning in plain sight." "Were you? Drowning?" "For a while. But I learned to swim again. Slowly." "How?" "One day at a time. One small kindness at a time. One moment of feeling like myself again at a time." She met his eyes. "It gets easier. Not fast, but it gets easier." Daniel nodded like he wanted to believe her. "What if I don't remember how to be myself anymore?" "Then you figure out who you are now. After everything that's happened, you don't have to be who you were before." They talked until the diner started making closing noises around them, chairs being stacked on tables, the coffee machine being cleaned. When they finally stood to leave, Alicia felt like she'd been somewhere important, had a conversation that mattered. "Can I walk you to your bus stop?" Daniel asked as they stepped out into the cool night air. "You don't have to do that. I want to, if that's okay." They walked slowly through the quiet streets, neither of them seeming eager for the evening to end. At the bus stop, Daniel turned to face her. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight, for listening, for seeing me. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. Can I see you again? Outside of the restaurant, I mean." Alicia looked at him, this grieving, wealthy, lonely man who'd somehow found his way to her orbit, and made a decision that felt both scary and right. "I'd like that," she said. When her bus arrived, Daniel waited until she was seated by the window before walking away. Alicia watched him disappear into the city night and realized she was smiling. Maybe Marcus was right about judgment versus heart, but maybe some risks were worth taking, especially when they came wrapped in honesty and offered with gentle hands. Maybe it was time to learn to swim in deeper waters again. Over the next 2 weeks, Alicia and Daniel fell into an easy rhythm. He came to the restaurant most evenings, always asking for her section, always polite but warmer now that they shared something beyond small talk. After her shifts, they'd meet at Harper's or take walks through the quieter neighborhoods, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel told her about his brother Marcus, not the restaurant Marcus, but his brother who'd shared the same name and had been everything Daniel felt he wasn't. Kind where Daniel was careful, generous where Daniel was guarded, passionate about helping people where Daniel just moved money around for people who already had too much. Alicia found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone in years, about growing up with just her mother after her father left when she was 12, about the scholarship that had gotten her through community college and the dreams she'd had of becoming a teacher before life got complicated and expensive, about the way Jeremy had made her feel like she was finally building something real, only to discover she'd been building it alone. "Do you still want to teach?" Daniel asked one night as they sat on a bench in a small park near the restaurant. "Sometimes I think about it, but I'd need to go back to school, get my bachelor's degree finished. It's expensive and complicated, and I'm not sure I'm brave enough to start over again." "What would you teach?" "Elementary school, probably. 3rd or 4th grade. That age where they're still curious about everything but old enough to really think about what they're learning." Alicia smiled at the thought. "I used to volunteer at an after-school program in Baltimore. The kids were amazing. They had these huge hearts and these brilliant minds, and all they needed was someone to pay attention." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "You'd be a wonderful teacher." "How can you know that?" "Because of how you are with people. You see them, you listen, you make them feel valued." He paused. "You made me feel human again when I'd forgotten how." Something warm and dangerous bloomed in Alicia's chest at those words. She was getting attached, more attached than was safe, probably more attached than was smart, but Daniel was gentle with her heart in a way that Jeremy never had been, careful with her trust like he understood how much it cost her to give it. The trouble started on a Thursday night in early November. Alicia was wiping down tables after the dinner rush when a woman walked in who immediately commanded attention. Tall and elegant in the way that came from expensive everything. Clothes, hair, makeup, the kind of confidence money could buy. She moved through the restaurant like she owned it, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Daniel's usual table. "Is Daniel right here tonight?" she asked Marcus at the host station. "Not yet. Marcus replied, professional but wary. Are you expecting to meet him? In a manner of speaking, I'm Laura Bennett. She said the name like it should mean something. Tell him I stopped by, would you? Laura Bennett. Alicia felt her stomach tighten with recognition, though she couldn't place where she'd heard the name before. The woman left without ordering anything, but her presence lingered in the air like expensive perfume. 20 minutes later, Daniel arrived for dinner. He looked tired, more so than usual, and when he sat down, he seemed distracted. Everything okay? Alicia asked as she brought his water. Long day, actually, long week, he rubbed his eyes. Sorry, I'm not very good company tonight. You want to skip dinner, go home and get some rest? Daniel looked up at her with something like gratitude. No, I want to stay. It's better here. Quieter. But he wasn't quieter. All evening he seemed on edge, checking his phone more often than usual, looking toward the entrance every time the door opened. When it came time to close, he lingered at his table like he didn't want to leave. Daniel, Alicia said gently. What's wrong? Nothing, everything, I don't know. He stood up abruptly, then sat back down. Can I ask you something? Of course. If someone from your past showed up unexpectedly, someone who represented everything you used to be, would that change how you see yourself now? Alicia thought about Jeremy, about how seeing him again might make her feel. Would it bring back all the old doubts, the old pain? Would it make her question the person she'd worked so hard to become? Probably, she said honestly, but it wouldn't change who I actually am, just how I feel about it for a while. What if they wanted you back? What if they thought you belonged in their world instead of the one you'd chosen? Is someone trying to pull you back into something you don't want? Daniel was quiet for so long that Alicia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, My ex-fiancée called today, Laura. We broke up right after Marcus died because I couldn't be who she needed me to be, and she couldn't understand why I was grieving so hard for someone she barely tolerated. Laura Bennett. That's where Alicia had heard the name. Daniel had mentioned her once in passing, months ago when he was talking about how isolated he'd felt after his brother's death. What did she want? To get back together. She said, I've had enough time to work through my grief, and now I can get back to being myself again. Daniel's voice was bitter. Like grief has a deadline, like you can schedule when you're done missing someone. And how do you feel about that? Angry. Confused. Part of me. He stopped, looking almost guilty. Part of me remembers how much easier everything was when I didn't think so much, when I just did what was expected and didn't question whether it meant anything. Alicia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Is that what you want? To go back to that? No. God, no. But Laura has a way of making me feel like this version of myself, the one who questions things, who wants something real instead of just successful, like this version is somehow less than what I should be. Maybe she's scared, Alicia suggested, though the words felt like glass in her throat. Maybe she sees you changing and doesn't know how to change with you. Maybe. Daniel looked at her with eyes full of confusion and something that might have been apology. I should go. Let you get home. Daniel, wait. Alicia caught his arm as he stood. Whatever you decide about your past, just make sure it's what you actually want, not what's easier or expected or familiar. What you actually want. He covered her hand with his, warm and solid. What I want is to keep talking to you until 2 a.m. about books and dreams and what makes people kind. What I want is to figure out how to be happy again without feeling guilty about it. What I want... He didn't finish the sentence, but the way he looked at her said everything. Then hold on to that, Alicia said. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting something real is wrong. The next evening, Daniel didn't come to the restaurant. Alicia told herself it was fine. He didn't owe her his presence every night. Maybe he was working late, maybe he was sick, maybe he just needed space to think about whatever Laura Bennett had stirred up. But when the second night passed without him, then the third, Alicia started to worry. And when Marcus mentioned that a woman had come by asking questions about Daniel's usual table, about who served him and how often he came in, worry turned to something sharper. What kind of questions? Alicia asked. Nothing inappropriate, just fishing. like she was trying to figure out if he was involved with anyone here. Alicia's heart sank. Laura Bennett was checking up on Daniel, trying to understand what kept drawing him to this place, and apparently, Daniel hadn't come back since their conversation. On Saturday night, Alicia's shift was nearly over when Laura Bennett walked in again. This time, she didn't ask for Daniel. She asked to speak with Alicia. "I understand you know Daniel Wright," Laura said, sliding into the booth across from her during Alicia's break. "He's a customer," Alicia replied carefully. "A regular customer from what I hear. Almost like a friend." There was something sharp in Laura's tone, something that made Alicia's defenses rise. "Is there something you need?" "I need you to understand something about Daniel." Laura leaned forward, her voice low and confident. "He's going through a difficult time right now. Grief makes people do things they normally wouldn't do, reach for things that seem comforting in the moment, but aren't actually good for them long term." "I'm not sure I follow." "Daniel belongs in a certain world, my world. He has responsibilities, expectations, a life that you couldn't possibly understand or fit into." Laura's smile was cold but not unkind. "I'm sure you're a lovely person, but you're a phase. A distraction while he works through his pain. When he's ready to rejoin real life, he'll need someone who can stand beside him in it." Each word landed like a small knife, precise and cutting. Alicia felt herself shrinking back into the girl who'd found Jeremy's note, who'd wondered what was wrong with her that made her so easy to leave. "Has Daniel told you he wants to get back together?" she managed to ask. "Daniel doesn't know what he wants right now. That's why he needs people who love him to help him make good decisions." Laura stood up, smoothing down her expensive dress. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be realistic. Ask yourself honestly, do you really think this is going anywhere? Do you really think a man like Daniel Wright builds a future with someone like you?" After Laura left, Alicia sat in the empty booth feeling like she'd been hollowed out. The worst part wasn't the cruelty, it was the tiny voice in her head that whispered, maybe Laura was right. Maybe she was just a phase, a distraction, something comforting but temporary. Maybe she'd been stupid to think this was real. When Marcus found her 20 minutes later, still sitting there staring at nothing, he took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing, everything, I don't know." Alicia stood up on unsteady legs. "I think I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind where you forget who you are and start believing in fairy tales." Marcus studied her with the same careful attention he used when deciding whether a customer was going to cause trouble. "That woman who was asking questions about Daniel, she came back, didn't she?" Alicia nodded, not trusting her voice. "And she said something that made you doubt yourself." "She said something that made me remember reality." "Alicia." Marcus's voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Don't let someone else's fear convince you that your feelings aren't real. That's not reality. That's just cruelty dressed up as wisdom." But as Alicia caught the bus home that night, she couldn't shake Laura's words. "You're a phase, a distraction. Do you really think a man like Daniel Wright builds a future with someone like you?" Maybe the smart thing would be to step back before she got hurt any worse. Maybe the smart thing would be to protect the peace she'd worked so hard to find. Maybe loving someone always meant risking this kind of pain. Daniel came back on Tuesday night. Alicia saw him through the window before he came in, standing on the sidewalk like he was gathering courage. When he finally entered and asked for his usual table, she felt her heart do something complicated. Relief and hurt and anger all tangled together. She took her time bringing him water, using the minutes to compose herself. When she finally approached his table, Daniel looked up with eyes full of apology and something that might have been hope. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi yourself, the usual." "Alicia, wait. Can we talk?" "We're talking. You know what I mean. After your shift. Please." She looked at him, this man who'd disappeared for 5 days after talking to his ex-fiancée, this man whose other world had come looking for him in her restaurant, and felt the careful walls she'd rebuilt start to go up again. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Please, I know how this looks, but I can explain." "You don't owe me an explanation. We're friends. Friends don't owe each other explanations for their choices." The word friends hit Daniel like a physical blow. "Is that what we are now? Just friends?" Alicia forced herself to meet his eyes. "I think that's what we always were. I just got confused for a while. Alicia, that's not... What can I get you for dinner? She asked, her voice professionally pleasant and emotionally distant. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then quietly ordered the salmon. Alicia wrote it down and walked away, leaving him sitting alone at his table with the weight of everything unsaid between them. She served his dinner efficiently and politely, but without the warmth that had characterized their interactions before. When he tried to catch her eye, she found reasons to look elsewhere. When he lingered after finishing his meal, clearly hoping for a chance to talk, she stayed busy with other tables. Finally, he left money on the table and stood to go. At the door, he turned back and said, "I'm not giving up on this, on us. Whatever Laura said to you, whatever you think you know about my choices, you're wrong." Then he was gone, and Alicia was left standing in the middle of the restaurant with her heart pounding and her carefully constructed calm falling apart. "You okay?" Marcus asked, appearing at her elbow. "I will be. You want to tell me what really happened?" Alicia looked around the restaurant, at the familiar tables and warm lighting, at the safe space she'd built for herself after Jeremy destroyed her faith in love. This was her world, simple and honest and hers. "Someone reminded me who I am," she said finally, "and who I'm not." Marcus frowned. "And who are you?" Smart enough to protect my own heart this time. But even as she said it, Alicia wondered if protecting her heart meant she'd have to give up the chance of healing it completely. And whether safety was worth the cost of never again feeling as alive as she had during those late-night conversations with Daniel Wright. The next few days passed in a haze of careful routine. Alicia worked her shifts, smiled at customers, went through all the motions of normal life while feeling like she was watching herself from a distance. Daniel didn't come back to the restaurant, which was what she'd wanted. So why did his absence feel like a physical ache? "You're miserable," her mother said during their weekly phone call. "I'm fine, Mom." "Alicia Marie Moore, I raised you. I know the difference between fine and miserable." Ruth Moore's voice carried the particular blend of love and exasperation that only mothers could master. "What happened?" Alicia found herself telling the whole story. Daniel's grief, their growing connection, Laura's visit, her decision to step back. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to make Alicia pay attention. "So let me understand this," Ruth said when Alicia finished. "You met a man who treats you with respect, shares his pain honestly, and makes you feel seen for who you are. Then, his ex-fiancée shows up, says some hurtful things, and you decide to throw it all away. It's not that simple, Mom. Isn't it? Baby, I watched you rebuild yourself after Jeremy. I watched you learn to trust your own judgment again. And the first time that judgment leads you toward something good, you let a stranger talk you out of it? She's not a stranger. She knows Daniel. She knows his world. She knows who he used to be. That doesn't mean she knows who he is now." Alicia stared out her apartment window at the city lights. What if she's right, though? What if I'm just a phase? What if when his grief gets easier, he goes back to his real life and I'm just left behind again? What if the sky falls down tomorrow? Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, you can't protect yourself from maybe. You can only decide whether what you have right now is worth the risk." "I don't know how to tell the difference between love and hope anymore." "Then maybe it's time to find out." That conversation stayed with Alicia through the rest of the week. Maybe it's time to find out. But how? Daniel hadn't come back to the restaurant, and she'd been the one to push him away. She'd made it clear they were just friends, nothing more. What if he'd taken her at her word and moved on? What if he'd gone back to Laura? The thought made her stomach twist with something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. On Friday night, Alicia was closing up when Marcus approached with an envelope. "This came for you," he said, "hand-delivered about an hour ago." Alicia's name was written on the front in careful handwriting she recognized. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short note. "Alicia, I know you said we're just friends, and I respect that. But friends owe each other honesty, and I haven't been completely honest with you. I'm not the same person I was before I met you. You helped me remember that grief doesn't have to mean giving up on joy, that being vulnerable isn't the same as being weak. That connection matters more than success. I don't know what Laura said to you, but I need you to know. I ended things with her permanently. Not because of you, but because of who I am when I'm with you. I'm better. I'm real. If that changes anything, I'll be at Harper's tomorrow night at 11:30. If it doesn't, I understand, but I had to try. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Daniel. Alicia read the note 3 times, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. He'd ended things with Laura, not because of her, but because of who he was when he was with her. Good news or bad news? Marcus asked, watching her face. I don't know yet. But you're going to find out? Alicia folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. Yeah, I think I am. Saturday night felt like the longest shift of Alicia's life. Every minute crawled by with excruciating slowness, and she found herself checking the clock obsessively. At 11:15, she hung up her apron with shaking hands. Go, Marcus said, appearing beside her, before you lose your nerve. What if this is a mistake? What if it's not? Harper's Diner looked exactly the same as always. Bright fluorescent lights, vinyl booths, the smell of coffee and fried food. But when Alicia walked in and saw Daniel sitting in their usual booth in the back, everything felt different. He looked up when she entered, and the hope that spread across his face was so pure it made her chest ache. Hi, he said as she slid into the seat across from him. Hi. They sat in silence for a moment, both seeming to realize how much hung in the balance of this conversation. Thank you for coming, Daniel said finally. Thank you for the note, for being honest. I should have been honest sooner, about Laura, about my confusion, about how lost I felt. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug like he was trying to anchor himself. After she called, I panicked. For a few days, I convinced myself that maybe she was right. Maybe I should go back to who I used to be because it was easier than figuring out who I am now. And what changed your mind? I went to dinner with her, Thursday night. Daniel's voice was quiet but steady. She took me to this restaurant where we used to go, ordered wine I used to like, talked about people I used to care about. And the whole time, all I could think was that I felt more myself in 10 minutes talking to you than in 3 hours trying to be who she wanted me to be. Alicia felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. What did you tell her? That she was right about one thing. I'm not the man she fell in love with anymore. But that's not something I want to fix. It's something I want to honor. He paused, then looked directly at Alicia. My brother's death broke me open, but it also showed me what matters. Connection matters. Kindness matters. Being seen for who you really are matters. Daniel. I'm not done. His voice was gentle but determined. Laura said some things to you, didn't she? About me, about us, about whether this is real. Alicia nodded, not trusting her voice. What did she say? That I was a phase, a distraction while you worked through your grief. That when you were ready for real life, you'd need someone who belonged in your world. The words still hurt to say, but less than they had a week ago. Daniel's jaw tightened with anger, not at her, but for her. She was wrong, about all of it. How can you be sure? Because I know the difference between distraction and connection now. Distraction is what I had before, pleasant and easy and ultimately meaningless. Connection is what I have with you, scary and real and worth fighting for. Alicia felt tears prick at her eyes. I was so afraid of being left behind again, of caring about someone who was just passing through. I'm not passing through. I want to build something real with you, slowly, carefully, in whatever way feels right to both of us. Daniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. But I need you to know, I'm not offering you my world. I'm offering to build a new one with you. The words hit Alicia like a revelation, not his world or her world, but something they created together. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. But I'm more scared of missing this chance than I am of taking it. Alicia looked at their joined hands, her brown fingers intertwined with his pale ones, both of them scarred in different ways, but somehow fitting together. She thought about her mother's words. You can't protect yourself from maybe. You can only decide whether what you have right now is worth the risk. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. How to trust someone with my heart again. Neither do I. but maybe we can figure it out together. What if we mess it up? Then we mess it up honestly. Together. Daniel's thumb traced across her knuckles. Alicia, I'm not asking for guarantees. I'm asking for a chance. She looked into his eyes and saw her own hopes reflected back, tentative but real, fragile but growing stronger. This man who'd been drowning in grief had somehow found his way to her shore, and maybe that wasn't accident or phase or temporary comfort. Maybe that was just love, strange and unlikely and real. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, let's try. Slowly, carefully. Daniel's smile transformed his entire face. Really? Really, but I have conditions. Name them. We take this slow. We're honest about our fears. And if you ever make me feel like I'm not enough as I am, we stop. Deal, but I have a condition too. What? If you ever feel like you're not enough, you tell me so I can remind you that you're everything. This time when tears pricked Alicia's eyes, they were happy ones. Deal. They talked until the diner started closing around them, planning carefully and dreaming cautiously about what their something new might look like. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel walked her to the bus stop like he had that first night. But this time when she got on the bus, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. 3 months later, Alicia was serving the early dinner crowd when Daniel came in with someone new, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and Daniel's smile. Alicia, Daniel said, his voice warm with pride, I'd like you to meet my mother, Ellen. Mom, this is Alicia. Ellen Wright studied Alicia with the careful attention of a mother evaluating someone important to her son. It's lovely to meet you, dear. Daniel talks about you constantly. Mom, Daniel protested, but he was smiling. It's nice to meet you too, Mrs. Wright. Ellen, please. And I have to say, I haven't seen Daniel this happy in a very long time. Alicia glanced at Daniel, who was looking at her with such open affection that her heart did a little flip. He makes me happy too, she said simply. They were seated at Daniel's usual table, and as Alicia served them dinner, she watched the easy interaction between mother and son. Ellen was nothing like what she'd expected from Daniel's descriptions of his family, warm instead of distant, interested in Alicia's work and opinions rather than dismissive. Daniel tells me you're thinking about going back to school, Ellen said as Alicia refilled their water glasses. Thinking about it. It's a big step. Teaching is important work. The world needs more people who care about children. That's what I tell her, Daniel said. She'd be amazing at it. Later, when Ellen excused herself to the restroom, Daniel caught Alicia's hand. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For giving us a chance, for being yourself with my mother, for... He paused, looking almost shy. For making me want to introduce you to my family. How did that conversation go, by the way? Mom, I'd like you to meet the waitress I'm in love with. Actually, it was more like, Mom, I'd like you to meet the woman who saved my life. Daniel's voice was serious now. Because that's what you did, you know. You saw me when I was drowning and you threw me a line. We threw each other a line. Maybe. But you taught me that being seen and being loved aren't different things. They're the same thing. 6 months after that, Alicia enrolled in night classes to finish her bachelor's degree. Daniel didn't pay for it. They'd had long conversations about independence and self-respect and the difference between support and rescue. But he studied with her, quizzing her on education theory while she made them dinner in his apartment or hers. A year after their first conversation at Harper's Diner, Daniel proposed, not with a ring that cost more than Alicia made in a year, but with a simple band that fit perfectly and a question asked on a Tuesday night after they'd both gotten home from work. I love our life, he said as they sat on his couch sharing takeout Chinese food. I love how real it is, how we built it together from nothing but hope and hard work. I love it too. I want to keep building it, forever if you'll have me. Are you asking me to marry you while we're eating lo mein? I'm asking you to marry me because I can't imagine eating lo mein with anyone else for the rest of my life. Alicia laughed and cried and said yes. Their wedding was small. Alicia's mother, Daniel's parents, Marcus and the restaurant crew, a handful of close friends. They held it in the community center where Alicia had started volunteering as a reading tutor because it felt right to begin their marriage in a place dedicated to helping people learn and grow. During their first dance, Daniel whispered in Alicia's ear, "Do you ever think about that first night, when you noticed I wasn't eating?" "Every day," she whispered back. "Do you?" "Every day. I think about how close I came to never finding you, how different my life would be if I'd never learned what it felt like to be truly seen." "Well," Alicia said, smiling up at the man who'd started as a sad customer and become her everything, "you don't have to worry about that anymore. I see you. I'll always see you. And I see you, the real you, the wonderful, strong, beautiful, real you." They danced to music played by Marcus on his guitar, surrounded by the people who'd supported them through the careful process of learning to love again. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy. Millions of people living their separate lives, most of them strangers to each other. But inside this small community center, two people who'd found each other across the divide of different worlds swayed to simple music and marveled at the miracle of being known, being seen, being loved exactly as they were. Later, people would ask them how they'd known it was real love and not just loneliness or timing or the comfort of finding someone who understood pain. Alicia and Daniel would always give the same answer. They'd known because love wasn't something that happened to them. It was something they chose, every day, in small moments and big decisions. Love was Daniel choosing honesty over comfort when Laura tried to pull him back into his old life. Love was Alicia choosing courage over safety when fear told her to run. Love was building something new together instead of trying to fit into someone else's idea of what their story should be. And love was this: two people who'd been drowning separately learning to swim together, creating a life that honored both their scars and their healing, their differences and their common ground. In the end, it wasn't about a rich man and a poor woman, or a black woman and a white man, or any of the stories other people wanted to tell about them. It was about recognition, about seeing someone's true self and choosing to value it, protect it, nurture it, about the revolutionary act of loving someone not for who they could become, but for who they already were. And that, Alicia thought as she danced with her husband in the soft light of their small, perfect wedding, was enough, more than enough. It was everything.